Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now here's your host for this week, David Pruitt.
Well, hello and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, www.studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, blog articles, and much more. Our goal here is that you are inspired, encouraged, and that the things that you hear on this podcast would equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you are serving in. All right, let's get into it. Today, I'm really excited. I have an opportunity to sit down with my buddy, John Simmons. We actually go way back to our youth ministry days. And so I am really excited to allow you guys the opportunity to get to know John a little bit through the podcast. But we'll start with this. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, man. Dude, we do go way back. And it's crazy to think back in those Amarillo days, man, when we were in student ministry together. And man, here we are all these years later, still doing the church game. So I love it. But man, I'm currently in Midlothian, Texas, serving as a campus pastor for Rush Creek Church. Man, I've got a beautiful wife who actually we met at the church that we met you at, David. So a really cool story. We were high school sweethearts, met through the church and got married and continued in ministry down here in the Metroplex. And we have 3 kids, one who's 14, who is now in student ministry himself. So it makes me feel really old, about to go into high school. And then we have a 11-year-old who's going into junior high next year. And he'll also be in student ministry. And then we have a 6-year-old little girl who's about to be going into second grade in the fall. So got a full house full of activities, man, between just personal life, church life. We're our campus here in Midlothian is a portable location. I'm sure we're going to talk more about that here in a moment, but that just means that our lives are pretty busy all the time. So we're always on the go. And man, but God's just been really good to us.
Oh, for sure, man. And it's crazy looking back at all the crazy cool things that God did in that time together. Like I think about just in that church that we met at, I graduated with your wife's younger sister. Her brother, Tyler, has been on this podcast, which that was crazy because he was a kid when we were there, and you guys are just a little bit older than us. And so it's crazy how full circle. And then the fun part of all of that is your father-in-law was our youth pastor.
Yep.
So it's just like, it was just so well connected, and like all of us ended up in ministry in some way.
That's right, man. Hey, and it wasn't there like, didn't you and I play, like we played drums in like the worship band or like good times, dude.
Oh man. So we could talk for days about all the ways that God's been able to use us. But today I'm excited. As we talked about, we're going to talk a little bit about church planting and what that looks like in John's context. It might be a little bit different than say the traditional model, but we're going to get into that and kind of talk about that. For all I know, it's exactly, if you guys don't know, the way that we do the student ministry conversation is we don't go in with just tons and tons of questions. It's more just, let's sit down at the table and let's do life together and let's do relationships together. And let's talk about youth ministry and all the things around youth ministry and how we can all grow together. So let's get right into it. So my first question for you today, John, is this. Can you share a bit about your journey into ministry? We kind of talked about that like in our South Georgia days, but kind of how you got involved in planning a church.
Yeah. So, man, whenever I was at South Georgia, going through high school, then I graduated. I actually was an intern for my father-in-law for one school year, my senior year of high school, actually, which was crazy, great opportunity. And then he moved and went to a different church, and Cheryl and I got married. And fun fact, this, got married when I was 18, so got the game started quick. And so, man, I just immediately was like just ready to roll into ministry. And obviously schooling as well. But man, it's hard to get a degree in Amarillo. There's not really a lot of opportunities there unless you're going to do all online. So I did a few semesters online and just realized, man, that I hated online class at school. So we knew we were gonna have to move somewhere, either to Wayland to go to, or Plainview to go to Wayland, or honestly down here to Dallas to go to DBU. So ended up coming down here to DBU to finish up my degree, and landed at a church at Rush Creek back in 2010. And they were fresh, I guess maybe like 6 years into the multi-site world. And so their second campus was actually a church plant location, and they were meeting in a middle school, and they needed someone to come in and be their student pastor for their campus. So that's what I kind of how I got into even in student ministry into sort of the church plant world, was actually through an established church that launched a second location that was portable as a plant. And man, that was a long road, because that was I came in May of 2010. That summer, there were multiple Sundays I showed up and there were 0 students at the church, and so I would prep a lesson, I would get everything ready, and we met in the athletic hallway of the middle school. So it was no air conditioning. It was awful. Sometimes 0 kids, and we just powered through. And man, in a couple years, we built our buildings that we moved into. Ministry started to take off, and so man, honestly, over the next 10 years, so 2010 to 2020, was just really fruitful years of ministry. I think just being consistent. I know that probably not any longer. Am I an anomaly? But 10 years at one church as a student pastor is, I've become aware of more guys that are doing that now, but used to, that was pretty rare. So
Yeah.
I think that God was blessed that. And then whenever it came time, for our churches continue to grow, we added more locations through mergers, and finally we were at a spot where the town that Cheryl and I lived, there were a lot of people from our church moving to that same town, and so we talked about needing to start a campus there. So that's how 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, we launched a campus, and I became the campus pastor of that campus.
Man, that's insane. Just like what you're saying, like I just came out of a church that I was at for 10 years, and man, that's such a interesting leave too, because it's one of those things where it's like you're there long enough to where you really feel like family, and
Mm-hmm.
leaving is not an easy thing. It's like
No.
this is what God's calling you to do, but it's like leaving your home. It's like graduating high school all over again and trying to figure out how to navigate all of that, and almost feeling like you're abandoning people. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, when I started at that church, I was 22, and so they basically raised me. I mean, all my kids, they watched them grow up, and
Mhm.
so it was hard. But again, the benefit of multi-site is that that was a Rush Creek campus, and I'm a Rush Creek campus, so I still am a part of the family,
Yeah,
just in a different town. So it's really a cool dynamic. We get to run in and see them all the time. So,
that's
but
awesome.
yeah, it's definitely hard leaving after a decade of ministry somewhere, for sure.
For sure. This doesn't exactly coordinate, but it might. I remember when I saw you at your church a few months back, you talked about basically leaving or coming back from camp right when the pandemic happened. Was that right before you made the transition to campus pastor?
Yeah, so spring break of 2020, we knew that that was going to be the year that I would move from student ministry and to start working to launch this campus. We were actually going to announce that we were going to launch the campus the Sunday after spring break. So we're going to do this big announcement. Hey, we're going to launch in Midlothian, and in the fall. So then we're going to start the communication plan and everything else. Well, we were in Mexico on a mission trip. Probably about 30 of the 50 people on the trip got sick. We don't know if it was with COVID or not, but we literally came back early, drove back into town through the border, told everyone to pretend they were feeling well, and we didn't want to get stopped. So get back in, and to my wife panicking and saying, we got to go straight home. Then to get home and then to get an email from our church leadership that we were not going to be having church on Sunday and the world shut down. And so what we were going to announce of getting to launch and plant ended up being put on hold. And so that was my last trip, was bringing kids back from Mexico, 30 of them, having diarrhea and throwing up, and it was awesome. So that was my last taste of student ministry. It was fun.
I remember you telling me that story. I just thought that is like the most epic yet saddest, but also joyful, and all the things just mixed in. That's ministry. That's ministry.
Yeah. And then when we're loading up, I was like, guys, look, everybody needs a roll of toilet paper and a change of underwear in your van. So let's roll.
There you go. Just grab it from the hotel or whatever.
That's right. Yes.
That's awesome, man. Oh, geez. So you really, I mean, when you jumped into it, you jumped into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dude, that's cool.
It was really fun. A few years prior to that, our church leadership had gotten some of the church planters. It was a course that that NAM was trying to develop, and so they wanted us to pilot it. And so they took like 3 or 4 of us guys on staff, who they thought, could eventually see maybe church planting or leading a campus one day. And so they kind of walked us through a little bit of that course. So we piloted it for a while. So I had some of that. I started my master's at Liberty, working on my degree with evangelism and church planting, and so I kind of knew that, like, and it's funny, the more we'll talk about this, everything in me was like, look, I don't want to plant a church like the guys who we had gone on mission trips to go support. Like, it just, I was like in panic mode. And I honestly look up to those guys because there's a lot of work and a lot of faith that goes into that. And if I'm honest, maybe my faith wasn't big enough, but I was like, look, I just don't want to go like move somewhere on my own and have to start. But I felt like God was calling me to do something really unique, and possibly to lead a campus of Rush Creek one day. So they started working through some of the, laying the foundation for that. But then, yeah, it was like, hey, COVID hit. By the way, we're still going to try to plant and launch a campus. It just may get pushed back a little bit, and so it actually worked out because I had a little bit more time to sort of not focus on student ministry and work on learning how to get a campus going.
That's good, man. That's really good. I can't even imagine, like, there's certain aspects in ministry that that if God ever called you to it, it would just scare you to death. And that's one of the things for me. Like, even the idea of like becoming like a lead pastor or a senior pastor in any way, like, terrifies me. And not because I couldn't do it, but because I love where I'm at. I love worship ministry and I love student ministry, and would love to be able to be a lifer in some way. And I know that may not be totally possible, obviously, but I'm only 34. I have at least 10 more years in me, right? So, oh man, you kind of went into this a little bit, but what did the process look like for you? Obviously, you had the opportunity to do this like church planting course and all of that, but so COVID happens, it shuts down the plans. How did you move forward, especially with all that uncertainty? I mean, all the churches were kind of figuring out, like, how are we going to continue all of that? So what was the process like for you?
Yeah. I mean, definitely do, like, our leadership, our lead pastor, man, just all of our we call them a church council, man, just godly, men and women who just, seeking after the Lord. And I think there's a lot of wisdom, in them just kind of trying to pay attention, to be wise with, how much of this it would be foolish to try to force this to happen under the climate and the conditions, and then how much of it is just going to be a really awesome faith step to get it moving. And so So we pray. We spend a lot of time trying to just discern that, and then I think just knowing, man, this is something that we believed God was in. I mean, He lined up a lot of the means. I mean, our church continued to give faithfully, and so our budget and our giving was really strong even through COVID. Even with obviously just the fluctuation of attendance and everything else. And so we just knew, man, just through prayer that God was wanting us to step out in faith. And so we worked on during the summer of 2020, just making sure that we had in fact, a couple years before, trying to make sure we could backfill my position as student pastor at my campus. So I was working on over that school year, training up a guy who would replace me, and then over the summer, making sure he was ready, but then kind of working on the action steps and the calendar of like what am I going to have to do to be ready to launch, and then looking at normal launch dates. August was out, so January was the next one that made sense just in the new year.
Mm-hmm.
So we started kind of working backwards. Hey, what are some of the things we need to hit? We need to do discovery nights, kind of see who's interested. Obviously, we had to we worked with Portable Church Industries to get our trailer and all of our equipment. So I had to work with them, and we worked with a team at our church just to pull together. What do we need? What items do we need to be purchasing? What do we need to pull together in that? And with our sound guys, our worship guys, everybody. So it was really then a lot of trying to pull together our launch team in the middle of that. And I think it probably worked to our favor because I think a lot of people there was so much uncertainty during COVID, and there was also, I think, people looking for, I think maybe somewhere to direct some of their attention, but also somewhere just to like be like, hey, look, we can either cower down and live in fear, or we can, kind of take life by the horns, right? Just run and see what God will do. And so I think some people were like, man, this feels like we're about to go on the attack, and in the middle of a pandemic, we're going to launch a church. Like, let's go. So, people who were down for a good time and for a challenge stepped up, and we made it happen.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
man. It's funny. I'm hearing more and more stories. Like, I guess as people are starting to sort of process through what 2020 and 2021 represented for so many of us, I think more and more people are beginning to have an appreciation for that time. Mostly because I think it woke the church up. If I'm being honest, that's the thing that I'm hearing across the board with student pastors from obviously Texas, but other places as well. Like, it seems like we're starting to understand that we were really complacent in our ways, in a lot of ways, and I think it's helped us to wake up and see like what's important. Number one, like especially as you talked about, like sort of, I know it became kind of a 2020 2021 like catchphrase, faith over fear, but at the same time, that was more than just a pandemic. That was how many things were we leaning into fear over, whether it be like keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, in another church, or different things like that. Like, it forced us to like reevaluate what's working and what's not working, and what's important. And you saw churches like across the board do better at media and sound and live streaming and all kinds of things. And so I think it helped more than it hurt, if that makes sense. And that doesn't mean to diminish those who were affected badly, because there were a lot of people losing lives, and people who are sick, and ongoing health issues and stuff like that. But it doesn't diminish any of that. But I know, at least for our context in this area, it woke a lot of us up.
Yeah, for sure. Man, it's something I didn't. I should have alluded to kind of in that preparation was, one of the things that we decided to do before just going straight into a launch was when we noticed there were a lot of people from our church that were moving down into this area. My wife and I moved down here as well, and so we were in the area, and we said, hey, why don't we start with a groups first approach? And so we started kind of rounding up all the people who were calling Rush Creek home already. And we just said, hey, why don't we make a couple of small groups down here, and we'll kind of start to build community through groups. And that was really great. I mean, we had 2-3 groups going, and so I think whenever we were getting ready to launch, there was already it didn't feel like it was just kind of out of the blue. Like, I think people knew, hey, this is kind of a stair step. Like we're trying to get community, trying to get people to know each other down here. We kind of invited people from our neighborhoods to come and be a part of that. And so we sort of already had some seeds planted. And then whenever we got ready to launch, then we already had people who were really bought in. So that was kind of a little bit of a pregame strategy. COVID, of course, put a little bit of question marks in their minds of what was going to happen. But when we announced we were ready to launch, they were, of course, already primed and ready to roll.
Yeah, and I can honestly say, as someone who got to visit your church, was it this year? I think.
Yeah.
It was a few months ago.
Months ago,
anyway, yeah. Man, you guys have done so much really quickly, but the big thing I noticed right out of the gate is just how welcoming everyone was. Like, it was just an incredible thing. And not every church, unfortunately, does a great job in being able to do that and making people feel like home. But also, like, if you didn't know that you guys were a new church, you would have thought that you guys had always been there. And you would have also thought it was like y'all's building. Like, you guys did a really good job of, like,
thanks, man.
There was even a part of me, because I remember when it was Jimmy Needham's church, and I was like, maybe they did buy the building, because it felt so like y'all did such a good job of making it feel like it was your own. So I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's a whole nother podcast, just talking about welcoming and signage and all of that. But we'll save that for a future episode.
Let's do it.
You pretty much already answered that question. I was going to talk about kind of the engagement around it, but you kind of answered that question with being able to start with small group in mind. I think that really makes a huge difference in planting those seeds and getting people bought in early on to the vision. At that point, it's not forced. It's like community built first. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yep.
So we talked a little bit about this too. So you get past COVID. What are some of the unique challenges that you faced moving, both from being a youth pastor going into a campus pastor position, and just in general, planning the church? What has been some of the unique challenges that you've had? I guess that would be kind of a personally and as a ministry as a whole.
Sure. So I could say one that was maybe short-lived, and honestly, I think just God's grace, God's favor in it is, when you're moving from a church, and you're in the same church, and you've had a decade of a reputation as the student pastor, then you're for a while having to try to get out from underneath that, what people have known you as for 10 years as the student pastor, and right or wrong, however you function in that role, however you do it well. Some people are really mature, and they crush it. Some student pastors are a lot more playful and still doing great ministry work, but they may come across a little bit more playful, and I think that's awesome. I think that God uses all of us, right? I probably leaned more toward, especially in the later years of ministry, I felt like I was turning my heart more to adults, and more toward really, I started seeing my ministry more to my adult leaders, and then really trying to push them into our students, right? So, which I think every student pastor has got to get to that point at some level. You can only go so far, right? So you had to start to lead adults who are leading your kids and your students. But I just started to feel really passionate about that, and so I just knew that for me to lead them, I needed to be the type of leader that they would want to follow. And so I've always just kind of functioned a little bit more out of being not as much of the goofball, but sometimes a little bit, probably more of the serious side. And so I don't know, just the way I was wired, I felt like that was some of the prep work that God was doing in me. So whenever I got to launch, I wasn't so far behind the curve of trying to have to come out from underneath this like goofball youth pastor stereotype.
Yeah.
But there were still some families that they just kind of needed to start to see me as their pastor, not as their kids' pastor, or like
Yeah.
their teenagers' pastor. So I would really just try to work hard to like spend time with them, man. Just again, trying to lead well, and trying to just be led by the Spirit. But that was something that I think maybe it wasn't always communicated to me, but it probably was just something I was always internally aware of. Is I knew that I needed to make sure that I was um, viewing myself and helping the adults in my church see me as their pastor that they could call on to lead them, versus, hey, that's my teenager's pastor. Again, nothing super wrong with that. I think there's every pastor in the church can pastor anyone, but there's just those lines that people start to draw. Just that's just how it works, and but so that was kind of a struggle that just wasn't terrible, but I just knew I needed to overcome that. Now, struggles or challenges with our church is just we had a lot of people that had never done portable church. So a lot of them were just like, okay, what is this? That first year, things that you just don't think about, like a lot of people are just trying to figure out, man, who are you? Who is this church? Like, what is this church going to look like? I think the first like 1, 2, 3 years, every year feels like there's um, a different focus for that year. Like, year one was just sort of like, hey, who are we? Like who's going to stick, who's going to stay? Because man, I'll tell you, there were a lot of people that dropped in and dropped out that first year, and that was a challenge, man. Because you're like, who are we going to be at the end of this year? And even year two, we saw a little bit of that. So year two was a lot of like, okay, now we're not a baby anymore, but we're in our second year. So how can we start to kind of shape up some of these things and start to really gain momentum? And then year three was trying to just turn more to be more on the offense and not just getting our feet underneath us. And then now year four, it's just kind of like, hey, we're here to stay. So like, let's start impacting the community. Let's start doing things. Probably, I don't know, whatever strategy most church planners roll with, that may or may not be theirs, but those are just some of the things I picked up on. And then challenges that I feel like we've had to, just a few. I mean, I could go on for a long list of challenges, but also I could go through a huge long list of blessings at the same time. So, but that's just to name a few.
Which is awesome, because that was actually my next question. On the flip side, what are some of the rewarding aspects that have come with those, whether it be the challenges or just things that you didn't expect?
Yeah. Man, I think people, God has brought us some of the best people at our church. Like, and I don't say that like, my lead pastor has referenced this before, and I've yet to say it from stage because I don't want to feel like I'm copying him. But like he would tell our church, like, man, you're a pastor's dream, and like I do believe that our campus, man, they're a pastor's dream. Where I mean, I've got people that I know have my back. I've got people who are just, they love our church. They're bought in. They're just really great folks. And so I just feel like, man, we're not so focused on a building, right? Because we don't have one. So we're not like, oh, that was a great blessing, like, so the great blessing really is that God has made the church, which is what it is, the people. It's a really great church. And so he's just really blessed us with great people, great leaders. Man, we've got some great friends that have come out of this. Man, and just, I think just favor even in the community. Like people are really starting to know who Rush Creek is. Our heartbeat is for a church for the community, and so, man, just God's favor there. I think that's what's going to take us to the next levels.
You hit on something that I think is kind of unique, and I never really considered it from your perspective. But a lot of us that have been in churches that are very well established, like in the sense of like every church I've served has been, like a First Methodist style church, that's, or First Baptist or something like that, where they've been around for 150 years, and their building is very established, and you're having those conversations like, okay, we're starting to get old enough that we have to start like building new things or tearing certain things down. And but one of the things that we constantly have to drive in leadership meetings is the fact that we, the church, are our people, not our building. And
Yeah.
we literally have committees that their whole job is to take care of the building side of that. And I just thought about that. I was like, I mean, sure, you have equipment and you have
Yeah.
assets and different things like that, but like for you guys, your whole perspective is it's us and we're here today and God may move us somewhere else later. And like, do y'all have that challenge as much on the having to like remind people like, hey, it's not a building, like this place could burn down or whatever, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, so our people are asking right now, like, which rightly so, hey, when are we going to build?
Yeah.
We were able to purchase 9 acres of land the beginning of last year in cash, which was awesome. And so we've been sitting on it and kind of got to wait for the next phase, right? So there's natural questions of, hey, what's the plan with the building? What's our timeline? I hate having to look at them and be like, that there is. I mean, we're trying to have conversations now about like what size, all these kind of things, but like we just don't have a timeline yet. And so, um, but I don't know that they're so focused on that. I mean, I think honestly, I think they get it. Now there's going to be a little bit of, even as great as our folks are, you get tired of setting up and tearing down. Sometimes the prospect of like having to ask people to show up at 7 a.m. whenever church may not start till 9:30, is tough. And even, hey, church is done at 12:15, and your stomachs are growling and you're just ready to go, but we got at 45 minutes to an hour to tear down. You kind of have to keep people focused on why we're doing this, and just try to make sure that they don't get too burned out by it. But again, I think that it just helps build that DNA where people feel like, man, this is it's God's church, but where people be like, dude, this is my church. Like, I have ownership, I'm a part of it. And so sometimes not having a building is actually it's actually a blessing
Yeah.
sometimes.
I could see that though. Like,
Yeah.
I think about the fact that like your people have to be bought in because it's not as
Mhm.
simple as show up, sit in your usual seat, and then leave. Like, there's, you have a job to do, and
Yeah.
then you get to learn and grow and fellowship together and dive into the word and worship together. And then, hey, the work's not done, we gotta tear down, and we're going to be faithful to set up and to tear down, and then we can go about the rest of our day and whatever else you have going on. I think there's a real beauty in that because you really need kind of all hands on deck, I imagine.
Yeah. Yep. Everybody. I mean, and at our church size, and this is, I'm not saying this is exactly why everyone has left. I mean, maybe the preaching's been terrible. I don't know. But, some people, it's really hard to hide when you show up at our church and to like not do anything, because everybody has to, like, everybody's got to be doing their part, since we're portable. And it's just who we are as a church. Like, man, we're just like, look, if you want to call Rush Creek home, we believe that God's given us all a gift and that you should be serving. And so it's really hard to be like, hey, I'm just going to show up and leave. When you look around and everybody else is serving, they're asking you, where do you serve? Um, there's always invitations to get you on board. And so, some people, they like to just, be at a church for a season when they can kind of show up and attend. And it's just a little bit more difficult to do that at ours. So
Yeah, I think there's a beauty in that. And then I would also say like one thing that I observed just in my time there was, I guess, you guys being a part of this Rush Creek network of churches. My mind went straight to y'all must be a mega church. Like my mind went to like you remember Hillside in Amarillo and how
yeah,
they,
yeah,
I mean, they grew crazy fast, and they have campuses all over the place in the Panhandle and down into like Lubbock, and I think they've even gotten even further south than Lubbock now. But each one of them have like 2,000 plus, and some of them 4, 5, 6,000 people. And I guess in my mind, I was like, wow, John must be pastoring like 5,000 people, which is incredible. But then I get there, and it was like it felt like a small church, and not a small church in the sense like everybody was like all up in each other's business or whatever. But it was just, it felt like family. And so I felt like you guys developed a church that wasn't small because, hey, we're brand new, but because we're a family and we're doing all of this together. And like I noticed how, I don't know, it just felt very organic. And if that makes sense, like I noticed even before you went up to preach, your wife Cheryl went to go pray with you, and then like 10 other people just sort of rushed over and started praying with you. I was like, I don't know if that's just something y'all do, or just people are like, hey, we're praying, so we're going to go pray over John right now. And I was like, I don't know, it had that small, from somebody who's been in a lot of kind of smaller to medium sized churches. I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I think sometimes people think to be in a system of church plants, then you must be a mega church. And I don't think that's always true.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't know that any of our campuses, our original campus that kind of birthed and launched and merged everybody else, they're probably, 1,600, 1,800 in worship on a Sunday. So definitely a much larger campus. But I don't know that our desire is to have every one of our locations be mega locations. I think that we feel like the churches that are growing the fastest, that are the healthiest, or at least, and even the strategy that our lead pastor, wants to continue to implement is churches that feel more like community, where you show up and you feel like you have a place to belong, and you're a part of what God's doing. And obviously, again, I know there's a lot of arguments. You could probably still accomplish that at a 4,000 person church, but there's just a different vibe, And so we want to stick to that for right now. And man, we feel like it's a really neat way of doing church. And man, those guys that pray over me on Sunday, it's funny because the men in our church just started kind of rallying up, and they were like, hey, we want there to be some strong leadership at this campus. And and so they were like, man, we wanted to start with our men. And so they were like, that's why on Sundays we want to be a church. I tell our church this almost every Sunday. We want to be a praying church, not just a church that prays. And so we are praying all the time, and so those guys are like, hey, we're going to pray over you before you get up and bring the word. So they're like, they drag me to the back and they pray over me, and men of our church circle up and just pray protection and blessing, and just that the Spirit would teach through me. And so, it feels, it's again, that's what I'm telling you, to have the blessing of the people that God has brought us, and those kind of men who would circle around me and pray over me. Huge. So.
Yeah. And I love the way that you stated that, because I think there's it may not sound like there's a huge difference, but there's a huge a huge difference between a church that simply prays because it's just what we do. We're supposed to be spiritual people. We want to connect to the Father, and an actively praying church that is constantly seeking the will of God. I've been talking about this a lot, pretty much in every opportunity I get, because I started noticing a trend back in like August, September of last year, that so many of us spend all of our time and really spinning our wheels, like begging God to come and bless our efforts and bless us where we are. And it's like somewhere along the line, we stopped asking God, where are you moving? Where is your Spirit at? And how can we chase after you? It's almost like we're begging God to chase us. And it's like, whoa, when did we get that so backwards? And I feel like your statement there, being a praying church kind of lends to that. where we're not just praying because this is what we do and this is kind of, your ABC formula of how we run a church, but we just want to be seeking after God's will for our community, and what does that look like in our context today, and where's God leading us?
Yeah,
I think that's huge, man. I think you could write a book on that.
Well, man, I stole some of it from Robbie Gallaty, so I can't take all the credit, but he just was like huge about just like how your prayer ministry or your prayer teams at your church, like, so for us, we developed a prayer team at our campus, and our other campuses are working on doing the same. Some of them have them, some of them are getting them going. So but man, ours, like I lean on them. All throughout the week, there's prayer requests going around, like in our little group text, and they're praying for stuff for the body. Just a few months ago, I reached out to them and just said, "Hey, our family's going through some difficult stuff right now. I feel like the enemy's attacking us." And so, man, they came to our house. They prayed over us. They anointed us with oil. Man, just praying protection over us and our family. And I reach out to them on a regular basis. Hey, man, y'all just be praying for this. Be praying for me. Pray for this sermon series. Or hey, I'm about to preach on divorce on Sunday, so y'all lift that up. So like, so I'm constantly leaning on them and being like, listen, man, we need to be going to the Lord in prayer all the time for all things, and I believe it's really made a huge difference.
You had mentioned Robbie Gallaty, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that like a particular like book or just someone you know?
Yeah, he has a discipleship podcast. He's written some books. Dude's just really, really, really good. I believe thought leader, pastor. Man, so he was, this one podcast in particular just was kind of on prayer ministry for your church. Kind of how he felt like it led to revival at their church, and was just a really key part of it. He has people praying during services. So there's a prayer team that are praying while he's preaching. So I was just like, man, those are just things that I'm like, if we're going to be a praying church, man, we can't just pray, before service, pray when someone's sick. Like we got to just be praying for everything at all times, and just constantly in communication with the Lord. So, and again, I think the culture and the climate of our church has really been impacted by it. So
that's awesome, man. Yeah. I'll get with you and get some some of his stuff, and we'll have that in the show notes for you guys. We're always about, if we can share resources, that's always important.
Yes.
So I think that's awesome. Here's an interesting question, especially considering you left student ministry to go into and even the strategy behind that. I really loved how you were intentional about how to sort of change the dynamic between people seeing you as like their team's pastor as opposed to I'm your pastor. And I think the intentionality there was really, really important and key, and something that I think all of us can take, because, I mean, truth be told, most of us aren't going to be in youth ministry for the rest of our lives. At some point, God is going to transition us, whether that's continuing in church ministry or becoming a senior pastor, an associate pastor, or I don't know, some kind of ministry, whatever that looks like. For most of us, I think that's a key bit of strategy that all of us can take away as God eventually transitions some of us. And I've had conversations even today with friends that are making that transition within the next year or so. And so it's kind of I think that's important information. I already put a note in my phone. It's like, hey, send him a link to this podcast when it's out, because I think that would be super helpful to him.
Well, man, I feel like even right now, for guys who are in student ministry, so many times we can get, and I was there where I was like, man, these parents don't care what I have to say, or, like they just want me to teach their kid, and I think somewhere along the way I thought, God has placed me and called me. And somebody said it like my goal was to be an expert in this field, So um, all things teenage, all things student culture. Like I just wanted to be an expert in it. And so even though at the time I wasn't the parent of a teenager, I really had to try to get past that to say, look, I know that I'm not parenting a teen right now, but I'm a student of student ministry, of the culture,
Mm-hmm.
and so then I think what that did is that helped me to go to the parents and to say, look, I may be the student pastor at this church, but I also am a pastor that you can lean on. And so I started to kind of break past even the lid I put on myself to start to go to parents and to say, hey, I'm going to pray over you. So parents would call me, there would be struggles, and I would pastor to them, and then key, I would fill my campus pastor in on, hey, this is going on, hey, here's a situation you should be aware of, but I would, in that moment, I would pastor or minister to that parent. And so it started to kind of get me out of this maybe lid I put myself under, and you start to see yourself as, that's what I was saying earlier, we're as a student pastor, you're more than just pastor to teens. Like you are a gifted, God ordained, called individual who is the minister of the word. Now your focus may be students, but you can minister to all people in the church, and guide them, direct them, love on them, shepherd. Sometimes we just, I think, put our own lids there.
That's a good point. And
Yeah.
man, I just recorded a podcast that dropped today about insecurities and the different things that and more times than not, it's our own thing. It's our own lids. It's our own sort of box that we put ourselves in. And so often God's like, I just called you to go out and proclaim the word of God. And yes, I've given you this, unique lens inside of that, but whether that's a student in your church or someone at the gym or someone at the grocery store, it really doesn't matter. Like, I guess sometimes we just need to take our own advice and our own sermons and apply it to our own lives, like we niche ourselves down. And the fact of the matter is, like, the call is the same for us as anybody else. And so kind of in that realm, and it kind of circles back just a little bit. But how did you guys approach building a youth ministry kind of from the ground up? I mean, I say kind of, it was from the ground up for you guys.
Yeah. So what's funny is I got to do it as a student pastor, and now I'm doing it as the campus pastor with somebody, like helping somebody else learn how to do it. Right. Those are two completely different things. So, because one is like I had total control, I had my vision, and so I was able to say, like, hey, I will be honest. Like, I think that in my mind, having gone through our student ministry days, but then also having interned at a different church before coming to Rush Creek, I think I had a pretty God-sized goal where I knew what I wanted this student ministry to look like one day. And so I knew I just had to figure out how to get it there. And so I'm 22. Dude, I'm still trying to finish up my last year and a half of college. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of life experience, so I didn't have a lot to dig out of. I just was like, okay, I'm organized, I'm administratively gifted. Um, System is a little bit, I think having systems is a little bit more of my gifting as well. Like, so I just started to figure out, okay, what are the things I need to systems and organization that I need to kind of bring to this to start to structure it, to point it in the right direction for growth. And so, man, I just had to make sure I was like, I knew leaders. I was only going to be able to love on as many students as I had amazing leaders. So I had to go make sure I recruited and onboarded some really, really great leaders. And then I had to make sure that, like, the students felt like this was their ministry. So I would constantly ask them, hey, what do you guys want out of this? What are you guys looking for? Making sure that they had a voice and that they had ownership. And so there was, and then even just implementing some of the things right now as the guy, the student pastor, I had to shut some of the things down because it was like that. It's a dumb idea. We've all we've all had those. I'm like, it's a dumb idea. It's not going to work. But I really had to like wow it before I howed it. A lot of times, so I had to be like, oh, that's great. And then, well, how do you think we're going to pull that off? And then they'd realize like, oh, there's no way to do that. And I'm like, exactly. So, but I feel like that was really where even portable. We didn't have a building, so I had to find host homes, and then again, I knew there was a lot of difference between a junior high kid and a high school kid. And so at first we had everybody thrown into one house. And then I was like, all right, I got to start to, again, multiplication is in my mind. So I'm like, man, I got to multiply this out. I got to get to 2 houses. I got to get to 4 houses. I got to have a junior high boys, junior high girls, high school guys, high school girls. And then I thought, okay, the next natural split is in high school, go 9, 10, 11, 12. And so then we ended up having like 6 houses, I think. And then we finally got in the building. And so again, I think it's just having a plan and working your plan was as simple as that sounds. Like sounds like such an easy answer, but I just realized there's a lot of guys that don't even know how to get the plan started, and just by God's grace and just some great mentorship of guys at our church. Like I think I just was able to put one together. So now fast forward and I have a student pastor that's working for me, and I'm having to balance. He's not me, so I can't expect him to do things exactly the way that I did them. So, but what could I encourage him to do to work on implementing some of the same values that I leverage to build, right? So it's, I've told him, I'm like, dude, give me some grace as I'm learning this, and I'm going to give you some grace as you're learning this. We're all going to just give each other a lot of grace. And I said, and I'm committed to you to make sure that I don't come across like I got it figured out how to lead from this seat because it's new. And so I think with that openness, I think it's been really good. I got a lot of stake in the game now because I have a about to be high schooler and about to be junior higher. So I believe that a healthy student ministry leads to a healthy church. Like, I'm one of those former youth pastors. So like I'm a fan. I believe in it. I champion it, and I want it to succeed. In fact, we asked our church, "Hey, is anybody willing to host uh, students at your house?" We didn't get a lot of bites on it, and so I said, "Dude, look, I'm tapped out. I don't want to have to do everything, but I believe in student ministry." And I was like, I'm going to host high schoolers in my house. And so I started smoking nachos for them on Wednesday nights, and they loved it. And it was kind of weird to be in a different role. Like I'm a host and I'm a dad. But I actually embraced it. I was like, dude, this is actually really fun. I don't have to do anything with these guys except feed them. But I feel like even for me as a pastor, I think stepping in to do that, I hope it spoke volumes to our church and to even to our students and to our leaders. Hey, our pastor believes in this and is for it, and he's willing to open his house on a Wednesday when he'd be doing a lot of other things. And so that's kind of where we're at, trying to get this thing rolling. Is that balance of, hey man, here's some things you can work on. Let's have a plan. Let's execute the plan. Where do you want to be? Let's set some long-term, some short-term goals. Position yourself to get there and make adjustments along the way.
It's funny. I mean, it's exactly what you said. Like, it sounds so simple, but that's just the truth. We spend so much time dreaming with our head in the clouds, especially,
Yeah.
I mean, especially as student pastors, like we're so used to like, man, we want to accomplish the world and we want to do all these things, and we're used to being told no.
Yeah.
Whether it's because it's like, hey, that's really great, but that's going to cost 20 grand and nobody's got 20 grand lying around, or like we could get too creative, so to speak. But like, sometimes it's less about having to create all these things and ways to do, and just saying, hey, this is what we want to do, this is where we want to go, let's just make the thing happen. Sometimes maybe we just overcomplicate it in the way that we process our systems, and sometimes it's just let's set a goal and like figure out how we're going to get there, and what's the roadmap to get there. And it's okay if you fail. It's okay if you get a flat tire along the way, like fix it and keep going, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I would encourage those who are listening that maybe you're kind of in the middle of that journey and trying to figure out, like, we set this dream, we set this goal, we don't know how to get there, or we thought we knew how to get there, and we've hit all kinds of like different like speed bumps and turns and bumps in the road. It's okay to keep going, but it's also okay to fail. Like, I don't think we talk about that enough. Like, it's okay to fail. You can't really appreciate the journey unless you do. And so, in case nobody's told you that.
No, I agree, man. And I think the other thing too is, I think you have to know your play and run your play, right? Like, it's like, football analogy, right? So you got to call the play, but if nobody else on the team knows the play, it's really hard for them to help you. And so that's why, like, with my adult leaders, and man, even with some of my students, like my kind of my leadership, I would tell them the play, and I'd be like, guys, look, here's where we're trying to head. Is this what you want? And is this what it would excite you to be a part of? But this is what I feel like God has called me to, and for us to do, and how He wants me to lead. So I need you all to know the play, so we can all run the play together. And I wonder, and I just know that there might be a lot of guys who they keep the play to themselves because, again, they're afraid of failure, or like, what if the play changes? Man, that's why you get to the line, you call an audible. Sometimes it has to happen, and everybody gets the audible, and then we change up a little bit, and then you just keep going. So I think, man, when you can link arms with people who you trust and they're willing to run the play with you, it helps you get there a whole lot faster.
Yeah, and that also brings up another point. Like, even if you have to call an audible, you have to be prepared for that audible. So that means they have to know the audible plays too. And so, I think so many of us, especially the more administrative ones of us, that I have contingency plans for my contingency plans. It's a beautiful thing, but like, let other people in on that. I think you make a good point there. Is so many times, like, we have it like living in our head, like, hey, this is what we're going to do, but if it doesn't work out, here's plan B, C, and D. Make sure everyone else knows the contingency plans too, because then when you call that audible, a team that just knows each other really well. Because I love football. It may not be super obvious with my hockey jerseys, but I got football jerseys there too. They're hidden behind my big head. But a team that knows each other, because when they call those audibles and everyone starts, like, you just see like the lineman pull, and you see the running back switch, and the wide receiver does like a jet sweep, and it's this like beautiful thing. And it's like, I don't know, there's like art and beauty in seeing the audible happen. And when it happens and all of a sudden they run like an RPO, I'm an Eagles fan, so I'm a huge RPO thing. I know you can hate me if you want. I'm used to being the, like, your Texas guy liking the Eagles. I just am. But a beautiful.
I said I like the Cowboys, so we're used to getting all the crap as well. So.
Oh yeah, totally. Right. So but like, when a beautiful RPO like runs correctly, it is so cool to see, and like, you could just tell the whole team is like meshing well together. And so I think the same thing can happen inside church. Like, when something happens and everyone pivots together, like, I can tell you times when my team knew where we were headed, and it's almost like, man, that went so beautifully. Why? Maybe we should have done that in the first place. But you appreciate it because everyone was on the same page from the start. It's kind of a cool thing. So, still there? I'm just making sure you didn't freeze.
Yeah, no, I'm good, man.
Okay, cool. I was like, the last session I did had a freezing moment, and I was like, I was gathering my thoughts, and I was like, wait a second, is he frozen?
Yeah.
It's a conversation, guys. So I guess kind of to wrap it up, because we went an hour fast, which is beautiful. Thanks for hanging with me,
Wow.
man.
Yeah, you bet, man.
Sometimes you get on these, and our goal is always fill 30 minutes. I didn't even think about the time, mostly because
I didn't
I feel
either.
like
Yeah.
we have that history that I'm like, I can fill it. Well, we both like
Yeah.
to talk, so it's good. Um, uh, I guess my let's close it this way. What advice would you give to either youth pastors or church planters looking to start or grow a youth ministry, whether it's something that's well established or something brand new, or you're the new youth guy or whatever it might be? Like, what strategies or advice would you give?
Uh, yeah, I guess some of it is, first I think mindset, I think coming in and just really learning to be content. Man, I that word I think was like a frustration for me for so many years because I'm a guy who always wanted more. I always wanted the next thing, the next the next level. So I was always like, okay, and that's what I'm saying. I had a plan of where I wanted to be, and so being down here was always like, okay, when's the next, like, because it was always just a how can I progress. And so I feel like I just heard a ton of people in my life say, man, you just really need to learn to be content. And I kept being like, man, that sounded so harsh, because I was like, I'm okay, like, but I'm driven. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And so, but I realize now, man, just how okay it is to just whether you're showing up new to a place or you've been at a place for a couple years or 10 years, and just looking at where God has you, always self-evaluation, but just looking at, size of your ministry, health of your ministry, and just say, listen, first and foremost, I want whatever I'm about to start working toward in growth to not come out of a place of striving, but out of a place of contentment in my walk with the Lord. I think it's okay to be driven. I think it's okay to have goals, to be ambitious. But if it's that you're trying to satisfy something in your heart through achieving, then I think that's where we've missed it, and I think I've missed it a lot in my life. And so, when I can just say, "Look, I'm content in my walk with the Lord, who He's made me to be, where He has me, what church I'm at, the size of my ministry, like I just am really working hard to just be content, to rest in the Lord." And then when I start working hard and I start to be driven and motivated, it's from a right heart posture than trying to fill a hole that I've not let God fill first. And so that would probably be like a first encouragement, to make sure that before you start to grow and strive and chase after something, to get that piece right first, or else the next thing will never be enough, and then it's the next thing, and then the next thing, versus when you hit the next layer, man, celebrate like the win, and you can enjoy it, and you can say, hey, it's maybe not all the way to where I want to be, or my vision or my goal, but man, there was progress, and that you can fully enjoy and embrace every step, instead of just being discontent or disappointed. And so I think some of that is probably more critical than the rest. I do think that what I've seen is I think I said it earlier. Just you have to be a student of, and this is a student ministry podcast, but a student of student ministry, right? Like, so many times I think we show up, and even after doing it for 8, 9, 10 years before I got out, I mean, I was engulfed in everything student ministry. I wanted to know, man, what are the trends out there? What are people doing? What's working? What are guys saying? Books that were being put out, podcasts that were being put out. We were a multi-site student ministry, and now there's a little bit more resources out there, but there was like zero resources for multi-site student ministry. So, I got together with some guys and I started networking, and we helped put together the multi summit, which I think is still going on. But it was just another place for guys who are doing multi-site student ministry to go and keep, sharpening their sword and, figuring out how do we do this? How do you structure your teams? Who reports to who? How do you share resources? Like, those are just things that is hard when you're multi-site and there's not a lot out there. So things like that, man, and then just having a setting down and just dreaming, like, God, what God-sized dreams, what do we want this to be? What would I like to see this to look like? What do you want this to look like? And then again, every kind of setting benchmarks, setting those goals. I wasn't always a numerical guy, but as a church that was really small, I did have numeric goals. I mean, I'm not going to lie. You can look, my prayer journal had prayers of like, hey God, at this D now, we called it student weekend, but at this D now, I'd love to have 50 students signed up. We had 30 last year, and so I started praying very specific prayers and giving those goals to God. Again, I'm however you feel about Mark Batterson or Circle Maker, but like, I mean, I love the quote, pray like it depends on God and work like it depends on you. And so, I would pray the mess out of those goals, and then I would work hard to go after them too. So, and then just surround yourself with the right people. Like we're talking about playmakers, or running the play. You tell people to play, they run with you, they help get you there. They know they're a little bit of accountability too. Hey, you said you wanted to do this, and man, is this helping you stay focused to get there, or is this a distraction? So I think there's just so many different means in which we could tap into to help us stay focused, go after what God's called us to, grow something. Always, and I say this now as a campus pastor or lead at my campus, is as a student guy, making sure that you're honoring your leadership, and that you're following their vision as well for the church, and coming up underneath that to support it. And I think it's going to go a really long way.
Man, I really appreciate your insight. And, even as you were talking about like being driven, I remember, and maybe it's just because I would have been like junior high when you were high school. And so you and Cheryl especially were people I hardcore looked up to. And especially like, when I started interning with your father-in-law, there was a lot that I learned from your time interning and different things like that. And so when you talked about being driven, I was like, man, I remember those days. I remember like some of the days where I was like in my head as a drummer or singing on the worship team or whatever. And I was like, man, I did great. And you're like, yeah. I don't remember exactly what you said, but it always stuck with me. Like, okay, so you did great this week. How are you going to make it better next week? And it was like, okay, cool. And I remember thinking, even as like a kid, and I'm still this way as a worship pastor, I was like, great, we had a great week. How do we do better next week? And I'm like, okay, there is a certain point where we plateau here. But in high school, because John Simmons told me that I can be better, there was no ceiling. I have to be better. And so it was like, okay, well, how can you get any better? I mean, especially growing up in the early 2000s of all drumming was 4 on the floor, kick snare. It's like, how do you do any better? It was like, you add double bass. That's how. And I was like, but you couldn't do that back then. Like you would have been laughed out of the church.
Push it, man. We'll push the envelope.
Do it anyway.
That's hilarious that you remember that, man. Oh my gosh. Hopefully I didn't say anything else back in those days.
No, it was always good. Yeah. It was always good and positive. But I remember that you always had that sort of athlete mentality of how can we be just a little bit better every week. And obviously I think that's lent quite well to your role now and how you got there. So I think that's a beautiful thing. And so, but I also like to see the growth there of like learning how to be content. Like that's something I've had to learn, especially as someone who doesn't fit one box, doing student and worship and media and graphic design. And so many times it's like, I'm always moving and always going. And sometimes being able to just take a step back and appreciate the moment. Like,
Yeah.
that's something that I think all of us need to learn if we haven't already. So I appreciate the insight in that.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. To wrap it up, as I say every single week, I think it's so important for you guys that are listening to understand, like, this is basically our virtual table, and everyone is invited to this table. I believe that everyone has unique passions and gifts, and we would love for you to join the conversation. Whatever you are passionate about and you can bring to the table, we would love to have you guys. We would be so honored if you guys would share our podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media. You can tag a specific episode or something that just really stood out to you by using at Talk Student Men on your favorite social media platform. Finally, if you would like to be one of our guests, if you'd like to join our virtual table, if you will, and on our show in the future, please reach out to us on social media. You can also email us at podcast@studentministryconversations.org. We would love to set up time for you to join us. Until next time, have a great week. John, thank you so much for joining us, for your insight and your wisdom. Man, it's cool to see what God has done in you in all these years, man, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man. It's been great talking with you, man. Catching up.
Definitely. You guys have a great week. We'll see y'all next time.